with the world championship coach and growing radical freedom fighting. Hey, say what's up to the people, Steve.
What's up, people? How you doing, Mike? How are you today?
Man, I'm doing all right. I think I needed to start off with an apology, man. I was looking at your Twitter feed and see like you getting some trolls, man. People seem like they coming for you in your comment feeds a whole lot these days. I hope I'm not getting you into too much trouble over there.
I was in trouble way before I met you, so you're good. I'm not going to blame it on you.
Well,
it's good trouble.
Yes, it is good trouble, and much love and respect to Representative John Lewis, who has been lying in state today in the Capitol. People have been paying their respects. We gestured a little bit at it last week, but man, we've lost quite a few giants in the last couple of weeks, and just reliving some of his journey across the country, whether he was in Selma or Georgia, now DC. Any quick reactions to just what it means to be alive in a time where such a very important person was walking the earth?
I just think the scene yesterday was incredible, and I'm sure you watched it. I'm sure you saw the procession across the bridge, and just the dueling images of the image we've all seen of him being beaten. What was that, 60 years ago,
Yeah.
to now, his body in a horse-drawn carriage draped in an American flag with his family behind it. It was beautiful. It was an absolutely beautiful scene, and just thinking about those two things together and the life that he lived in between those two moments, just incredible.
Yeah, it is indeed a moment for all of us to have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, to what extent are we willing to recommit ourselves to the ideals and the vision of justice that Representative John Lewis committed his literal whole life to. And for me, as someone who's a result of the direct progeny of that kind of effort, I know that I continue to wake up every day and just hope that I can live up to it, right? And be as faithful and as a person of integrity and not settle. I think, one of the things John Lewis, even in his youth, he was considered more radical than Dr. King.
Right.
Like,
right.
There was a story that they were afraid to let him speak at the March on Washington, and they actually had like either someone ready to hit the mute button or have Mahalia Jackson ready to start singing if he, got too boisterous with his commands and demands for justice and to literally march through the streets of Washington. And so I just think it's really important, as we are all really trying to figure out how do we respond to all of the activism that's happening now that may make some people feel uncomfortable. Man, these young people and all these activists in the streets are literally channeling John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and all Martin Luther King, all these people we revere in history. These young people are literally in the streets channeling that energy. And so I just hope that we all can make those connections,
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, I read that story too. Apparently they had to take some of his words out of the speech that he had prepared. And I imagine everybody goes through some kind of a transformation or a change at some point when you're involved in activism, where because we're all learning all the time. But I think the most important lesson that I learned reading about John Lewis was just when the fact that he realized how much power was in nonviolent protest, and there was so much sort of collateral spread of the message when it was nonviolent. And I know you've talked a lot about this both publicly and privately in conversations with me about, when you've been in the streets of Oakland leading protests, you've been so adamant about keeping everybody attached to the message. Here's the message. It's peaceful. This is what we're asking for. And as soon as there's any looting going on, you're taking your crew and you're saying, no, this is getting away from what the message is. And I think it's so important because there's so much propaganda that's out there. And so, what's happening right now, and you see it in Portland, is you get a few people who destroy some property or paint some graffiti on a wall. Next thing you know, there's all this propaganda about what's happening in the streets, and it's so easy in the modern life that we live for people to spread false rumors and lies, and when the message really is right there where you talked about. It's the message is what we're asking for, which is justice and peace, and that's what John Lewis lived his life for.
Yeah, I think it just continues to push all of us to have to keep clarifying that peaceful protest is a strategy for making the system react and respond to the demands, but certainly it is also an attempt to expose the violence of the state, right? That literally all across this country, all many of you have to do is go sit in the middle of the street. You don't have to have no weapons. You don't have to have just sit in the middle of the street long enough and they will bring out police and military to try to remove you, right? And so it is an effort to expose the violence of the state, knowing that if we can expose the violence of the state, then hopefully it creates a certain kind of trigger in the moral consciousness of people who we want to believe have a consciousness and say, hey, we need a change. And unfortunately, sometimes nonviolent protest, aka Colin Kaepernick or others kneeling, can still be used as propaganda for those who are willing to turn our good intentions into nefarious efforts. And that's why we got to keep organizing. And so, as folks organize in the streets, I'm one of these people where I feel like I only want to, be responsible for the folks I organize and bring. But if other folks are out there doing nefarious things, unless they're getting ready to harm one of the bodies of my folk, I'm like, hey, you just make sure you be responsible for your actions out there. Stay safe, keep everybody else safe. Because I'm always about, we got to protect people over bodies. I mean, people over property and bodies over buildings, mostly because we know those things can be rebuilt. But most of the time, bodies and people can become collateral damage. And so let's stay vigilant and keep committing ourselves. Whether you marching in Oakland or in Louisville, we're going to have one of the young sisters on who's leading that effort to get justice for Breonna Taylor and give us a live update of what's happening on the ground. But more than anything, this is an effort for all of us to recommit our lives and our greatest energies to making sure we can dismantle what, for John Lewis and many before then, has been a lifelong struggle against racialized violence, white supremacy, human hierarchy, racism in this country. And we still got a little ways to go.
Yeah, and history repeats itself, because what's happening right now, as we know, is everything's being thrown into this political campaign that's going on, and Trump right now is deciding he's going to be the law and order president, and so he's actually going to start stuff and put groups in there, and so they're actually the initiators of this confrontation in Portland. And so now Trump can get this stuff on camera where, he can say, look, it's lawlessness in America. I'm the president who's going to clean it up. It's the exact same thing Richard Nixon did in 72 or 68. This is an age-old political trick. And so it's important to be able to function with full awareness of what's going on with the election, and to be able to navigate that whole landscape is tricky. It's really difficult.
Well, that's why we got you here. We look like Jamel Hill just got in the room, and we got Chanel Helm, and we got Justin Steele. We got all these comrades here because we want to keep helping the conversation to educate folks and raise the consciousness. And always, what has brought us to this conversation is Masks for the People. We are here to keep raising PPE and to keep talking about the need for cities and states, and dare I say the nation, to prioritize our most vulnerable loved ones, Black and brown individuals in our cities that don't have access to personal protective equipment. Up to this point, we just literally sent 40,000 masks to Houston, and they are, I heard today, 3 family members of one of my friends in Mississippi and Houston are all struggling to live right now because COVID has really literally gripped their family. Folks in Florida are having a tough time. And so folks up in the Yakima tribes in Washington State having a tough time. Los Angeles is having a tough time. So it's still an issue. So Masks for the People, go to masksforthepeople.org or livefreeusa.org and donate and help us keep this thing going. We meet every week because we want to keep the conversation going. We want to raise some consciousness. We know that there's some folks in a lot of our different spaces that may not ever be a part of a conversation like this unless we brought ourselves together. And so in a moment like this, let's love one another, let's support one another, but let's also open our heart and our mind, because conversation can indeed enlighten so many people. And so we're super excited to have the legendary, living, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Jemele Hill is in the building. Look at that. Look at that.
Hey, good to be on with you guys. I don't know about legend, but I'll take it.
We'll get to the legend in a second, but let me just make sure I give you all your props and much appreciation to Kristen Ingram at Plus One Society and Steve Kerr for bringing Sister Jemele in. We cannot take credit for it because this sister is like, man, on the move. But originally joined ESPN in 2006 as a national columnist for ESPN, and that's why she is a legend, because she was one of these folk who spoke out super early when it wasn't popular and would not recant. They couldn't break the system down, and she was like, "You can take this job and shove it." No,
it's like Steve knows he's in the club too. He knows.
But folks like her and Colin Kaepernick and others, I think history will read your legacies well, because before it become popular, you all were using your national platforms to shine light on this. And so that's why I and many others appreciate you, and we call you a legend. We don't throw that word around because not too many people are willing to put their own personal platform on the line to speak truth. So you're in a great legacy with our freedom fighting ancestors. So I'm gonna let Steve here because I'm just here to just like read your bio, and I know you and Steve, y'all gonna
give yourself more credit than that, Pastor Mike.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Jemele, and I agree with Mike. I mean, you stood up at a time when it was really not popular to do so, and to do it not only as someone in a position at ESPN, with national acclaim, but as a Black woman in a position where there aren't a lot of Black women in that field, on TV, especially 5-6 years ago. There had to be a moment where you kind of said, all right, this is it. This could be my career. Did it feel that way at the time, or was it as easy as, you know what, I just got to do what's right?
This is where I'll be honest with you guys. That phrase "ignorance is bliss" comes from. Is that I honestly, when I tweeted it, because I always have to make that distinction, because there's still a lot of people who believe I said this on the 6 o'clock Sports Center, that Donald Trump was a white supremacist and a racist. I did not say that on Sports Center. I said it on Twitter and in a back and forth, not even our own separate tweet. I didn't at the president. I didn't do any of that. It was just like really in a conversation. And honestly, I thought everybody knew. Like, I didn't even think that I was saying anything unique or original. I mean, before I said it, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an entire amazing essay for the Atlantic detailing all of Donald Trump's warts, his racism, his bigotry, how many of his ideas and policies have been shaped by Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, things that we all know to be true. And so I just thought, especially this is post Charlottesville, that we had all, or at least most of us, had come to this agreement like, oh yeah, the president is a racist. So right, I was like, oh okay, yeah. No, I'm thinking we in the circle of trust. Like, oh, I thought we all knew this, right? And it turned out there was a lot of people who either didn't know or didn't want to own up to it, or frankly were comfortable with this being what people at least perceive about the president. And so when I tweeted it, I never thought I was going to get in trouble because I thought I was just telling the truth. So I didn't think it was something that would jeopardize my job or that it would get as much backlash as it did. Never did I expect the White House and Donald Trump to ever respond to what I said. Because I mean, I should be just a blip on the screen. You're president of the United States. You have a lot of things to worry about rather than worrying about what a SportsCenter anchor is tweeting. So it didn't feel that way initially, but then when it started to snowball, it did kind of start to hit me by degrees. Like, oh, yeah, I nearly might get fired over this. Like, okay. Like, all right, so that could be a thing. But I never panicked or worried about it. I was really quite calm because I wasn't gonna take it back. And I'm not sure even if I tried, people would have believed, like, that one time I said the president's a racist. Turns out I was not telling the truth. Like, that's just not the type of thing you say, and then you just put the toothpaste back in the tube. I made a similar argument about Colin Kaepernick. His crime, so to speak, by NFL standards, is that the reason I often say that Colin Kaepernick would have been back in the league had he hit a woman is because that is behavior that they can sell to the public that's corrected. You can't sell that somebody's mindset about white supremacy and racial oppression and injustice and inequality has changed. Like, what he thinks is what he thinks. And that's much harder to control. And so it was the same with me. It's like, once I said that, there was really no taking that back, for the most part. So nor did I have any desire to take it back because I thought it was the truth. And because I felt that way, it was one of those things where I was calm knowing that if it cost me my job, it just cost me my job. And I know that sounds very cavalier and blasé, and I certainly don't want to take for granted that a lot of people work really hard. A lot of people desire to be in the position I was on in SportsCenter, that this is a destination job for a lot of people. This is not to diminish what that role or that job means, particularly as Steve noted, being a Black woman in this field. But it is to say that some things are right and some things are just wrong. And I would not have been able to live with myself had I taken that back and, just retracted or for that matter, even apologized to the president. I would have never been able to live with myself.
Yeah. I imagine that afterwards some doors opened up that you probably never could have imagined would open. But can you share with our viewers kind of, what you've been up to, what happened that surprised you or didn't surprise you? Where's your life taking you? Just share with us what you've been doing.
So I live a completely different life than I led in 2017 when this all happened. I got married. That's when I got married 8 months ago. Okay. And while I was seriously dating my husband then, is that wasn't quite on as much as on the horizon. And the truth is, there was why it was good for me is that there were a lot of things I certainly desired to do outside of ESPN. And because I was very unhappy on SportsCenter before the Donald Trump stuff happened, because it just wasn't a good fit for me, I just pretty much in my mind, I'm planning it to where I would just play out the rest of my contract. We'll see what happens. But I was starting to sort of plot my exit strategy, so to speak, anyway, even though I had at that time 4 years left on my deal. But I was thinking of it as a much slower process. And when all the controversy started and, getting suspended and all those kind of things, what it taught me was that I really need to have a sense of urgency. Like, what am I waiting for? Why am I waiting to start this next phase of my life? And I had a really great career at ESPN. I was there for 12 years. It's the longest job I ever had. It's the best job I ever had. I had done everything that I came to do. I mean, I got to SportsCenter, did TV every day, was one of my closest friends, wrote some columns and covered some things, and got to chronicle a lot of historic sporting events, and that was all I came there to do. And so it felt like the mission was complete. And because ESPN was in this unbelievably ridiculous vortex of being known as a liberal network, I mean, frankly, I used how they were being perceived. I knew that while they would never fire me, essentially I did become a problem that they had to deal with. And I used that to my advantage to shoehorn my way out of there. And while they offered me a couple different jobs before I left, these were all things I'd kind of done before. So there wasn't really that appealing. And I don't think that they did that on purpose. I think they were fine with me staying. So we didn't leave on bad terms, but it just felt like a good time to leave. And, I was able to get my production company that I have with one of my best friends from college that I have with her off the ground. So we have a lot of things that we're working on now and getting into
Lodge
developing.
Lodge.
Yes, Lodge Freeway.
Lodge
yes,
Freeway.
Named after
Yep. So
media,
y'all,
named
y'all
after,
go look up Lodge Freeway Media
yes.
and blow it so it can be as big. I don't know who's big right now, but bigger.
So it got me into developing content. The Atlantic is a publication I've always loved and respected. So it was an opportunity to continue what I love, was my first love, which was writing. But this would be different because, even though I wrote at ESPN and I wrote in newspapers before then, it is frankly very much a relief when you write for a publication that isn't in business with the sports leagues, right? So you can cover it in a much different way. And you could take a look at some things and dive into some issues that maybe I would have felt a little reluctance to do before, because being in business with the NFL, there's some tricky terrain that you have to navigate if you're at ESPN. So I got the opportunity to do that, and to explore other possibilities. And as I like to often joke, I traded in one job for about 72 jobs. So I have a lot of jobs. I have a TV show coming out in a few weeks with Carrie Champion, which is appropriately titled Stick to Sports, which, just so you know, we plan on doing everything but that. We're not stick to sports at all. So, but we know that used to be a thing. Hopefully that's gone. But to just wrap up what my answer here, so I don't ramble too much, is that it gave me the guts. Going through that gave me the guts to really go after what I wanted the next phase of my career to look like. It did open some doors, thankfully. It has amplified my platform and expanded my profile. And sports and writing will always be my first love, but I can dig in harder now of using sports as that particular entryway to talk about things, politics, elections, voting suppression. Like, sports is a great avenue for that, because if you think about a lot of the things that we do in this country, we don't do a lot of things together. The one thing we still do together is sports. And so that's why it gives you a unique opportunity to reach some people and talk about some things that you maybe can't in other areas.
Well, talk a little bit about this moment. How do you read this moment? Because it is indeed the case, right, that while several years ago, Colin and yourself and a few others, right, in the sports world were a little on the outlier of this, now you see sports leagues who were at that. I was in Ferguson, and I remember when some of the comrades, Tev Poe and D. Sills, rest in peace, and T-Dub, a lot of them went to the St. Louis Cardinals game to protest the killing of Mike Brown, and they called the police on them young people and ran them up out of the Busch Stadium. And now you see baseball teams, football teams, the NBA and WNBA, I think, were a little bit ahead of the curve in this regard. But what does it say to you that now sports teams, corporations, like lots of folks are now on the at least marketing bandwagon of like Black Lives Matter, which, is no small thing, because dollars do move like corporations and sports teams. But just what's your sense on the political climate we're in, and how it is intersecting with sports, culture, activism, and the elections coming up? I've given you a lot, so just jump in wherever you feel like you want to swim.
Well, it is. On one end, it's beautiful to see. On the other hand, it's very frustrating. And I can imagine how the previous generation felt seeing Martin Luther King Jr. go from being the most hated man in America to fast forward 20 years or so later, and he has a national holiday.
Wow.
And so that I understand why some of the elders remain very skeptical. I mean, as Steve said, like as much as there's this mantra about like not letting history repeat itself, we let it repeat itself all the time. We literally never learn. It's amazing. And that part is really frustrating because I'm seeing some people try to jump into this conversation that when the moment called for it, when there wasn't this public opinion behind them, they cowered. I mean, the NFL is the best example of this. I mean, they sold out their players and they sold out Colin Kaepernick and ruined his career because they wouldn't stand up to Donald Trump. And it's just that simple. And I don't care.
Apologize. Like they ain't even forced their lips. Yeah, you think Colin even exists? I'd be like, boy.
I do wonder though if legally maybe that is the reason why they haven't, because they did settle a grievance, a labor grievance, and so I wonder if that has to do with it. But either way, the whole point is that they ruined this man's career because they didn't have the guts to stand up to the president. And I don't care how many Black national anthems they sing before the game. I do not care what they put on the helmets. These are all fine gestures. They will never, ever be able to atone for failing in that moment. And what I would say to the NFL is if they do want to even come close to atoning for that moment, it's not about the money they give to Black Lives Matter. It's not about these other fancy little gestures that they want to build around saying and showing that they care about the players and how culturally responsible and socially responsible they feel. They need to address the systemic racism in their own league. They have 3 Black head coaches and 2 Black general managers, and they've never had a majority Black owner. Address that before you start talking about police brutality and Breonna Taylor and all these things that are very important, don't get me wrong. But until you're willing to address what's happening in your own league, everything you do is going to ring hollow and insincere to me, particularly since we're only a few months removed from them having to bribe franchises into hiring Black people. Wow. So the NFL needs to wear this. And if they are shamed and embarrassed, that's what they deserve. And I would say that to a lot of these corporations who are putting out these fancy little statements, but still giving us politicians whose policies, mentality undermines social justice and racial progress at every turn. Please don't talk to me about, Black Lives Matter when you're giving money to people like Senator Kelly Loeffler. Don't talk to me about it, right? Because you're really working backwards. Stephen Ross, don't talk to me about your organization, your social justice organization, when you raised $12 million for Donald Trump. I don't want to hear it. So it's, to me, this is a reckoning. This is accountability. This is what it looks like. And they are just going to have to be shamed into doing the right thing, which, as we know from history, that actually works. It does work.
It's a deep pool, though, that you're talking about, because you can go in at every level and say, all right, this isn't enough. We've got to do more. And we do have to do more. And what I mean by that is, everyday Americans need to look at where's their money invested? If you have money in the stock market, I mean, I've had to think about this, do I have money invested in companies that are practicing policies that are hurting poor people and Black and brown community? It's forced me to open my eyes and think, I gotta pay attention to everything, because it all matters.
See, that's a good word, because something I didn't know, and I had to look, because a lot of us, if you have a 401k or if you go mutual funds, right, it's just a collection of stocks. And a lot of times, like you said, you don't pay attention. Like some of them you recognize, with Amazon, Netflix, like you recognize some of them. But there are other ones, and I didn't realize this till a few years ago, that it was a prison stock that I was investing in, and I had no idea. And I can't remember the name of it right now, because it's very common, and a lot of people, it's in this stock. But to your point, what you said about that, I had to defast and be like, hey. And I even told my wealth manager, never put my money in anything like private prison. Don't ever do that. But those are, not, maybe some people say, oh, well, that's privilege that you have stock. I agree. But these are little things that you can do if you say you're not somebody who feels like, oh, I can go out and march or do other things, but you can certainly watch where and what you invest your money in. So that was a great word from you.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of action steps that I think we're trying to help folks appreciate, with whether it's Mask for the People or registering to vote or voting absentee ballot. Like, you know, sometimes we lionize the John Lewises, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Bree Newsoms of the world, and be like, well, I'm just gonna let them climb that pole because I'm just out of shape and I can't do nothing. Woo, that was a great pole she climbed, and not realize that it is the accumulation of just faithful acts, right, over time that make the kind of extraordinary steps people make much more sustainable. What would you say to the audience of people about, if you can give them 2 or 3 things? This is the gospel according to Jamel Hill and Donald Trump. Do these 3 things and you can be saved. What would they be?
Well, what I would say, that's funny, the pastor you coming out. My overall banner statement is do what you can where you are. I think people would be generally very surprised at how the smallest things can translate into something much bigger. If you live in a community and you know voting access is a problem, if you can, when you go vote, take an elder with you, and provide some level of transportation for some people who don't have the ready access to vote. For those, you brought up something very important, is like absentee ballots. I know there's a lot of people, understandably so, that do not trust mailing in their ballot. I get it. Believe me. We, in certain states, they have shown they cannot be trusted. Hello, Georgia, I'm looking at you. So I get it. But at the same time, we're going to have to get creative, particularly in this election, and do things maybe outside of the comfort zone of what we're used to doing in order to ensure that we have voting access. Figure out a way to help people so that on election day, it's not a 7-hour wait, which is, criminal, as we know. But the forces that are trying to suppress these votes, that they're going to be out in just a huge fashion. And they're going to do everything possible to get you to not vote, or to get you to be discouraged or apathetic. And what I would also, 2 other things, you said 3 things, right? One was do what you can where you are. 2 is, if your vote didn't mean anything, why they always trying to take it from you? So please understand that. And the 3rd thing I love to say, my favorite phrase of 2020, is district attorneys are elected positions. Remember these 3 things, okay? District attorneys, they're elected, and they often run unopposed. So if you have one that is in your community that is not holding the police in particular accountable, or has in many ways created more stress and more oppression within your community, it is surprisingly easy to get these people out of office, because they're usually in there based off apathy, and the fact they take advantage of the fact that people don't vote. Local elections matter, and in most cases, they matter more than the national election. Who your mayor is, your district attorney is, who's on your school board, those things truly do matter. And you could shape the community that you want to live in however you want, but it requires you to be actively engaged. Do not be one of these people who says they don't like to be in politics. Your money likes to get in politics. And I know you're in the habit of flushing money down the toilet. You're paying for these government officials. The least you could do is hold them accountable. And I'm off my soapbox.
I got a question. You've kind of taken on this new role where you're looking at society, not necessarily from a seat at SportsCenter, but you can maybe you don't have to be as accountable to people who deal with sports, so you're given a little more sort of freedom to look at whatever you want, and it's probably challenging sometimes to know what you want to write about. So how do you, when you're in sports, here's the sports world, this story caught my eye, so I'm going to write about that. How do you now, with this blank canvas, how do you decide this is something I see and this is what I want to write about?
It's a lot messier because these are not columns that could be, most times can be answered with, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. Like I just wrote a column about Deshaun Jackson and the anti-Semitic post that he had. That's a very nuanced issue. What he did on the face of it was wrong, but there's some other things happening there that I thought were worthy of discussion, questioning, critical thinking. We find out writing for the Atlantic audience is that there's a certain lingo and language in sports that when you're at a sports network or writing for the sports section, say in a newspaper, that are understood that you don't have to explain. So I find myself having to explain a few things more about, how these leagues work and operate, because a lot of the Atlantic readers are not hardcore sports fans. So you're talking to them much differently from a standpoint of what is systemic and, just different layers to it. So it's a lot meatier and a lot messier at the same time. I certainly will be writing about this situation with the Florida Marlins and Major League Baseball and seemingly everybody but the NBA failing at trying to get some level of containment on this pandemic. And I'm, if I were still at SportsCenter or, still on any of the sports discussion shows, you would approach it from more of a bare bones sports perspective. Well, I have to link this to, honestly, our failure as a nation to get a handle on this pandemic and what it says about a very privileged class being professional athletes who have access to, the best health experts, plenty of tests. They are living in an optimal circumstance, and yet you have multiple people who are testing positive, which should let you know, if even in an optimal circumstance, that this is hard to control. What does that mean for our most vulnerable populations in this country? It means it's a lot worse, and probably much worse than we're reading about and watching on the news. So I look for those kind of intersections where I can use sports to become a reflection of what we're all seeing and talking about. And I find the conversations, as I mentioned before, to be a little different, because if their favorite athlete gives a voice, or a favorite coach or team gives a voice to an issue, they actually might see it a different way because it's impacting their favorite whoever in a different way. And they might look at it differently. Whereas if I were purely a political writer, people are very dug in right now on their sides. And there's not a lot of coming together or common ground being sought. But in sports, to some degree, it's a little easier to show the example of common ground. So I just look for something that's a reflection of society. I look for, again, messy entanglements. I look for nuance. I know it's a lost art these days, but I try to find those things. That's what fascinates me most about the conversations that we have right now. Look, I will always love the competition of sports, athletes, players. I love, having inane, pointless player debates like anybody else, but I don't miss doing that. I got to be honest. Like, I don't really miss doing that. I feel like the conversation we need to be having right now is about what sports means in a larger scope and how it's intersecting with culture, race, gender, politics. That's the conversation we need to be having. And so I'm glad that I'm not in the results business anymore. This is the critical thinking business.
What do you say about the WNBA? One of the members of my church is Layshia Clarendon. And so
I love her. She's amazing.
Yeah. She's well, yeah, we agree on all that. What do you think about the WNBA kind of being such a powerful point of the spear on just taking these bold stances? And it's cool now seeing that, like I'm seeing people wearing WNBA sweatshirts, the orange logo sweatshirts, kind of like a regular thing. Not saying like, participating in buying gear is a litmus test, but it is cool to see that it's paying off. Their social justice stance in the public square, as with most kind of women-led efforts and Black women-led efforts in particular in this moment, is really helping push conversations. Any quick words about the WNBA? I think it's a fascinating.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's interesting you brought up that sweatshirt because, I mean, they're literally everywhere. The person who originally, if we all remember this, and, I always think about this whenever I bring him up. You could never have convinced me earlier this year that Kobe Bryant would not be the biggest story of 2020. Wow. You could not have convinced me that would not be the case.
You're right.
And that feels like it happened 5 years ago.
Yes.
And it hits me every now and again, like, oh my God, he's actually not here. But if you recall, he was the one who wore the sweatshirt.
Yeah.
And he wore it while on the sidelines of a WNBA game, and it became a bit of a hot item then. But the reason it became a hot item, beyond just because a player of his stature and magnitude was wearing it, is because of his unconditional support of the league and how he wanted to use his presence and the fact that he generally loved their product to elevate and amplify these women. And I think that's what people took the sweatshirt to mean, as a way to elevate and amplify these women. And it may just be buying a hoodie, but it says something that you have, you know, men and NBA players and little girls and a cross section of people wearing it. And I always remind people of this in terms of the WNBA and their social stances. These are women who have everything to lose. They do not make nearly as much money. They cannot afford to be out of work at any point of the year or to lose anything that they have had to work twice as hard to gain. And yet, months before Colin Kaepernick took a knee in protest, it was the Minnesota Lynx. Because this was after Philando Castile, after the horrible events in Dallas. And they decided that they were going to speak up and speak out. And they had the Minneapolis Police Department leave their post in protest because of what they said and because they had the nerve to actually speak of police brutality. They had a lot to lose, and they lost the support of the police department back when that wasn't so popular to happen. All right. Wow. And, you know, seeing what Maya Moore has done, I mean, this is somebody who, I believe the stat is, she has won a championship on every continent but two. It's bizarre, right? She has one of the most decorated resumes, man or woman, of all time. She is a perennial champion. So imagine giving up all of that through in the prime of her career to free one person, and that's not to minimize what that is, to spend 5 years of her life freeing an innocent man from jail. So I say this all to say is that women, particularly Black women, have always been the conscience of this country. And we had to say Wakanda. And now we had to say the Democratic Party. We may have to say this election. Unfortunately, these are not new burdens to us. So I applaud the WNBA because given the position that they're in, and for them to be as vocal as they are and to find the opposition. I mean, they have Senator Ted Cruz going after them over what is false anyway, because they didn't walk out during the anthem. They walked out before they went back to their locker rooms before the anthem was played. But to have somebody like him in his position to take such a cheap shot at them for doing that, this is what they're up against without nearly the same amount of financial support. So I think we all would be remiss if we didn't do what we could to support these women, support that league. And just really, you know, that's why it was a different feeling seeing them come back, because I know that they have so much more that they are risking. And so it was great to see them back on the court and seeing them playing basketball again.
I would argue that getting bashed by Ted Cruz is actually a badge of honor, but
touche.
Well, I've actually been on the other end of a couple of his comments. Did he ever go after you?
Yes, he has been after me a few times. I look at this guy representing the great state of Texas, and I'm like, really, Texas? I know y'all can do better. I know y'all can do better than this. Like, well, we know it.
We hope at this election season we do better in all kinds of ways. And I'm just grateful for you hanging out with us for so long. I feel like we can keep you here all day, but maybe we just.
Oh man, this is a pleasure. This is great to be on.
I just must say that I see the 49ers helmet in your background, which lets me know that you are a great woman. I just want you to know that.
I mean, I can move out my way if you want to see this. There you go.
I see an Emmy. All right, I see an Emmy, and maybe next year we'll have a Super Bowl championship replica right next to that 49er helmet. That'd be great.
We're this close. Just run the ball, Kyle Shanahan. Run the ball.
I was watching NFL Network yesterday. They were replaying it, and I had to turn it off. You know, I was at the Super Bowl, and I just was distraught, and I was depressed. I couldn't preach or talk for a whole 2 weeks. But anyway, it's great to have you hanging out with us, and thanks for your work. Everybody, make sure you look up Lodge Freeway Media. She's a writer with The Atlantic. She has her own. You still have your podcast?
Yes, really the podcast too. Jamel Hill is Unbothered, which is on Spotify. One of these days, I'm gonna bribe Steve to come on and be a guest. I don't think you gotta twist his arm too bad. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you guys.
Okay.
This was awesome. Take care, everybody.
The great Jamel Hill, Steve, man, that's a good one right there, brother.
Well done. She's the real deal.
He's the real deal. And shout out to Plus One Society, Kristen Ingram. She is the homie, and she has been helping us get connected to all these wonderful, wonderful folks. So I think what's so powerful about her, and again, you know, I appreciate her saying she didn't know that she was going to lose her job. And I said ignorance is bliss. But the reality is a lot of people have tried to keep their jobs by trading in their integrity. And she, you know, obviously did not. And I do hope that all of us, when the rubber meets the road, my mentor told me that, you know, God is not asking everybody to be a martyr, but when the time comes, God is asking all of us to keep our integrity. And if it leads to that, then so be it. If it doesn't, then cool. And so I do appreciate that, you know, folks like her and Colin and many others are in very small and big ways keeping their integrity. And it's cool to have those kind of examples in front of us right now.
Well, it pushes the ball forward, you know, it really does. I knew years ago, and you did too, Mike, that Colin Kaepernick's reputation was going to change. We saw the exact same thing with Muhammad Ali. You know, he was the most reviled figure in America. You know, when he boycotted the Vietnam War, and wasn't too long after that he became the most beloved. So, you know, but it takes somebody with guts to get out and lead and accept that kind of hatred and criticism to get everybody else to come forward. So much respect to Jamel for sure, because she's part of that.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited. We got a couple more folks that are coming in, and Justin Steele. My goodness, now you want to talk about one of the greatest to ever do it? He is the director of Google.org, which is the philanthropy arm of Google, and I'm super excited to have him in the building with us. Justin, are you here?
I'm here. After that last segment, I was about to go get my Seahawks jersey out, but you know, I was backstage and I didn't know when you were going to bring me on. So,
Phil is a big Seahawks fan, but Coach Kurt he does a lot of work with Pete Carroll, so I'll let y'all do a little fan.
There you go.
To give the program a little more balance.
It's all good. I'm not a hater. I appreciate y'all.
Well, it's great to have Justin here. So Justin is a native of Virginia, right?
Seattle. I went to school in Virginia, but that's why I'm a Seahawks fan, man.
People from the South, because we went to the museum and we saw a lot of you know, places where we even thought, man, some of our people from the same town, we may be long lost cousins or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, one of the privileges that you and I had was to go down to the opening of Brian Stevenson's Lynching in America Memorial. And yeah, my father's side of the family is from North Carolina, so yeah, we got roots in the South. It was surreal to see those pillars, man, and realize that our people had witnessed those lynchings back in the day. It's that was humbling.
It was very humbling. But you are the director of the Google.org and have been on the front lines of the inclusion, education, economic opportunity work. And me and Steve were just thinking it's great to have folks like yourself on, because as we are seeing, this moment is creating a huge conversation around corporate responsibility and philanthropy and wrestling with justice and injustice. Last week we had on Amy from Tom's, and I was like, man, I need to bring Justin on, because Justin is the first guy I met who was like talking that talk and walking that walk. So welcome to Mask for the People. And Steve, I know you all work with Google a lot with some of the players and the organization around certain causes in the Bay Areas, but we're both glad to have you.
Oh man, it's great to be here. Always good to be walking with y'all.
Yeah, you know, Justin, I'm always interested in the convergence of social unrest and corporate involvement, right? And I mean, there's a major intersection that's there now, and I think there's so much possibility there because so much of what's happening in the country these days really goes back to, you know, how can we provide a safety net and, you know, better opportunities, job opportunities, and better education for young people, so that we have a country that's you know, filled with people who are frankly happier and
That's right.
and live, you know, more comfortable lives and more fulfilling lives. So, you know, you're with one of the biggest companies in the world. So how do you see those roads converging yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we started a racial justice initiative back in 2015, and Pastor Mike was one of the very early people we connected and sort of helped guide us into that space. And I think one of the challenging things with working at the intersection of companies and justice work is we've all kind of lived and breathed this racist idea that Black-led movements are violent and dangerous and hateful and angry and political. And so it's very difficult then to bring a company into the intersection of that and convince folks that actually the movement is full of love and vision. And y'all were even just talking about Kaepernick and the legacy. And I feel like, you know, for revolutionaries, they age well, but in the moment, you know, it is really challenging. And so, you know, that's been one of the most encouraging things about being able to work at Google, is that you can provide that platform to hopefully give people like Pastor Mike and Live Free and other movement organizers the opportunity to be seen and heard and valued, and to hopefully take a little bit of that stigma off. And so, you know, Mask for the People, we put $250,000 in Mask for the People, you know, and it just, you know, it's been huge because it allowed us then to do some additional work with the Morehouse School of Medicine around racial data. And COVID has brought us into all kinds of spaces, but there is a real challenge to get over that early hump, you know, and trying to convince folks that, you know, all the stereotypes of what movement work isn't actually what's at the heart of these movements.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating thing to just not only benefit from the investment you all have made. I mean, that $250,000. As soon as it hit our account, it went out the door to buy more masks. And, you know, I was laughing with folks like, you know, I can spend some money. Y'all give it to me, because folks out here need masks and they need sanitizer. Talk a little bit about COVID in this environment. I mean, I think we've, you know, our families kind of do some stuff together, and just the nature of trying to parent children during this season is proven to be its own kind of struggle. And I can imagine many corporations are really having to reimagine just work and how you make life kind of function without so much stress in these perilous times. I know Google's dealing with that as well. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it was an intense pivot in March as we started to recognize the global nature and how this thing was spreading, and we pretty much had to scrap the entire strategy. At the same time, I mean, our three girls are all in Oakland public schools, so it's like the school shut down, you're pivoting your entire strategy. You know, there's a lot of hurt and need in the world, and to Steve's point, like, companies have a huge opportunity and responsibility to step up in those moments. So it's like our team is being called on to really step up. And so some of the early work was around supporting particularly minority and women-owned businesses and trying to get cash out the door, you know, to support that. And we did some work around cash transfers. So $10 million out to the door to low-income families around a lot of Google offices who were struggling. So it was like, that was the immediate. But then, you start to see these news reports roll in about the way that COVID is hitting Black and brown communities. And, what we realized early on is like 60% of states weren't even tracking the racial disaggregated data. And, one of the fantasies of a post-racial society is that, we don't need to see race, we don't need to measure race, but then it hides all of the racial inequity right under the surface. And so that was one of the early moves we wanted to make, was like, how can we start to measure the data disaggregated by race and see what's happening? And of course, we're finding then that morbidity and mortality is significantly higher in Black and Latinx communities. And so that grant to the Morehouse School of Medicine was really about how do we start to measure and get a hold of this data so that it's not an obscured problem, but then also recognizing that our folks are hurting, and we need to get some stuff out on the streets like today. Yeah. And that's why Mask for the People, when it came in, was so inspiring. And I don't even know, Mike, if you know this full story, but right when the moment of racial violence started kicking up, like we put Live Free on an employee giving campaign. And back when we started this racial justice work 5 years ago at Google, it was largely led out of the Black Googler Network. It was a grassroots led.
Talk about the Black Googler Network, because this is like so cool, and I think it's a fascinating thing that I wasn't aware of until we all got a chance to do some work together with 3.5 Minutes back in the day with Lucy Macbeth and them. But
yeah, I mean, so the Charleston church shooting, and it's really sad that it has to be murder and death that it is the moment of reckoning in a lot of these cases. But the last time we really had a significant one was the Charleston church shooting, and our Black Googler Network organized like a global demonstration within Google in the Day of Solidarity. And I remember waking up that morning and watching pictures roll in from like the Singapore office and the London office, and like people were making homemade Black Lives Matter t-shirts, just like a white tee. The movement hadn't really been branded yet, so it was like people didn't really have all the merch, and so it was like people just making their own shirts and all these pictures coming in. And the Black Googler Network, we really were the ones who organized that grassroots effort, and we made an initial commitment through my team to do $5 million of grant making, which has gone into like policing and sentencing and prison work predominantly, and we're up to like $40 million now. But what was really interesting back then is that like it was grassroots. I remember we did an employee giving campaign because Google matches employee gifts, and we raised about $100,000 from Googlers, and we were just like, this is amazing, and the money was going to Black Lives Matter and Live Free and other like grassroots movement-led organizations. And then this time around, we put Live Free and Mask for the People in our giving campaign, and we raised $12 million. I mean, it's like, it's like, and I think the difference is like just like the broader U.S. Like this is such a multicultural movement at this point, and it's gone from being just sort of a voice of a few number of people trying to change the narrative, trying to get attention to. Over 11,000 Google employees gave to this campaign, and so to see that shift has been really, really cool. I think it's a special moment that we're living through.
Justin, you mentioned you have, did you say 3 girls?
Yeah. 6th grade, 4th grade, 2nd grade.
Oh, man. You're in the thick of it right there.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is just, with this school season being up in the air and nobody really knowing how it's going to play out, a lot of people don't have access to a computer, an iPad.
Right.
So how do you address that in your position, trying to get people help with online schooling if they don't have enough technology at home? Yeah, maybe this isn't your department. But I'm just thinking out loud here.
No, it's definitely intersects with our work for sure. We started a distance learning fund, was one of the things that we did right when COVID hit, and we put about $10 million into some of those distance learning efforts. But it is a challenge because you have an infrastructure problem with broadband internet access, right? Particularly as you move out into rural communities that aren't connected. But also we know that there's disproportionate access to the internet, as you come across the poverty line in cities as well. And then the device issue. And so I know at Oakland Public Schools, like my kids, like for the first like couple of months, like nobody could get access to those computers, and they were trying to get the laptop carts out and whatnot. And now it sounds like OUSD secured a big donation, but part of the challenge is a global supply chain on Chromebooks. I mean, like every district in the country is trying to order like 100,000 Chromebooks.
Wow.
And so even for Google, like early on, we were struggling just to get Chromebooks out to some of our employees so we could do, remote work. So there's been some real structural like supply chain and sort of systems challenges that make it very hard to scale. You know, my Google.org gives over $200 million in philanthropy a year, but when you started talking about trying to make a dent into, a structural issue like that, even $1 million here or there is just, you're just denting the problem. So
Right.
It's been the structural side of that's been really challenging. You can do great partnerships with things like Khan Academy, who are creating amazing online content to be able to teach kids at home, but the physical infrastructure piece of it is challenging because Google, a lot of people think like, oh, Google could do Chromebooks, but we don't actually make the Chromebooks. We just do the software and the operating system that's on them. So we don't have these storehouses. And even if we did, they'd be empty. So it's a real challenge right now to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the real interesting things about the way in which supply chains have worked in this pandemic, and believe me, I figured it out just by trying to get math. It's really interesting just to see how fragile like our supply chains are in this country. Like, food, just sanitizer, masks. A lot of our exports can easily get just bottlenecked and run to a halt because we're outsourcing so much of our production. And when we first started the campaign and said we want to raise $1 million to secure supply chain, I thought the hardest thing was going to be to raise the money, and the hardest thing was actually to find somebody to pay to get the mask and the sanitizer. So much so that we now create our own sanitizer. We're not even forcing it because we found it was easier to create sanitizer domestically than try to figure out a way to bring it here internationally, as well as masks. But I do think one of the things I believe about philanthropy can help catalyze and jumpstart, like, solution oriented kind of efforts. But the real task for us, I think, in this country is to leverage our tax base just differently.
Yeah.
Leverage the tax dollars that are being spent at the local, state, and federal level to ensure that we do have an equitable educational system where there is no digital divide, as the Rainbow Push Coalition used to talk about like decades ago, to make sure that there is no food deserts, right? To make sure that we don't have any unequal educational, both teaching and curriculum. That should be provided by our tax dollars. And because our tax dollars are spent so much on police and jails, then we run to Justin and to other philanthropy folks, and for the most part, some of them are great, but I do think that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we figure this thing out. So I appreciate it. Go ahead, Jay.
I was just gonna say, I mean, one of the things that I've been wrestling with, I'm slated to do a talk with Ibram Kendi in a week, and so I've been rereading Stand from the Beginning and kind of reflecting on his scholarship. And I think one of the most powerful things that he talks about is that racist ideas aren't upheld predominantly by hate and ignorance; they're upheld by self-interest, and that's been really challenging for me to think about. Is as we interact with these systems, as you look at the intersection of capitalism and racism, as you get into all the things that companies do, to what extent are those racist ideas and the disparities that they produce upheld, not because people just are ignorant or there's not enough education or people just don't know, but that actually is working for folks. Like there's a segment of folks who this system is actually in an equilibrium that's working for folks, and that it's in their self-interest to keep it. And I've been really challenged by that lately, just thinking about what are the systems that are around me that I might be ignorant to that are actually maybe even unintentionally at times upholding these disparities. It's a challenging thing to do that audit and try to figure out what role we're all playing in upholding those things.
That's such a great point. And I've just finished reading Kendi as well. Mike recommended the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And,
Yep.
The idea of policy sort of being the undergirder of so much racism. And then, to be in a position where you sit, with this, this big corporation, and then you got government making policy decisions. How can we get those things to converge where it goes beyond, hey, let's have a great wing of charitable giving, which you guys have. How can we get it to converge with, you know what, let's actually get together, lawmakers and corporations, and create a system that can protect the people who need protecting. That's sort of the holy grail in my mind as I think about all this stuff. And I have no idea how we're going to get there, but I do know enough about the government to know that corporations drive a lot of government policy. And you're right. How can we get the people who are running these corporations to kind of take that next step and make decisions that are for the well-being of people?
And I've seen
we before you answer, Jay, I'll just say one of the ways we have to do is make sure the people themselves are included in that conversation, right? So, corporations, government, but also the people most closest to the problems, because sometimes people do things on behalf or for other folks and don't appreciate their blind spot could make the thing much worse, right? And so, I think that's one of the dope things about the way Justin and some of these, you would say you're part of a new kind of generation of philanthropy, right? Like a different kind of orientation, particularly on the corporate side, because most community foundations or even traditional foundations, they don't give as much for obvious reasons. They don't have a endowment as big as y'all's profit margin.
Yeah, no, I do think that there is a generational shift happening in philanthropy. I mean, philanthropy is a pretty old sort of status quo space for the most part. And I feel like, you got mentors like Darren Walker, who I think are leading the way for us, that we're standing on the shoulders of. But hopefully my aspiration is always like, people shouldn't know Justin Steele, they should know Pastor Mike. So hopefully I mostly live in the background to just give the platform to lift up the great work. But I do think something Jemele Hill was talking about is relevant here, which is like, she just sort of mentioned briefly that like ESPN's caught in this vortex of accusations that they were biased and, politically and just too liberal or whatever. And I do think that is a really challenging dynamic to get out of that vortex, because technology companies are in the same place where there's all these accusations of bias against conservatives. And so when you're in that vortex, it's very hard to be able to just to step out of it, and support work that other people might use or politicize in order to point the finger and say, oh, see, there you go, supporting Pastor Mike again. Like, we got you, we knew it. And so, when
I put stuff out there, I know, be like, oh man, we are the world. Can you say we are the world, please?
But that is one of the challenges. And so, of course, like the self-interest of a company sometimes in the short term feels like, well, let's not get caught up in that vortex. Nobody wants to be in those people's Twitter feeds. And so let's just play it low key. And yet, that can be some of the conundrum of this. And when you can break through, I think if you're a company like Google, you can sort of take the edge off for people a little bit. And we've done some great partnership with the Golden State Warriors Community Foundation too. And I think it's like when you take those two kind of brands together, and people are like, oh, y'all are supporting Hidden Genius Project? Like, that's only supporting young Black men. And it's like, yeah, and it's amazing. And that's the solution if we're gonna, create opportunity. And people are like, all right, maybe I can get down with that. The Warriors and Google are down with it. So there is an opportunity, I think, for us to get out to that leading edge and lead the way for people. But it is a journey. It is not easy.
Now, Steve, Justin, one of their big investments in us was for our gun violence prevention work, which, meant you were able to come and hang out with us in East Oakland about. And really, if it wasn't for Google and a few other really, really cool philanthropic supporters like Levi's, the Joyce Foundation, California Endowment, all of them together helped us to catalyze the gun violence prevention work that has gone somewhat. So I just think it's real cool to know that some of the work that they've been supporting, even if it was kind of controversial or tense, it's proven to be somewhat mainstream now, which is, I think, the point of like what happens when you can follow local leadership or grassroots leaders. Sometimes people closest to the problem, they just have a sixth sense. They have a third eye about what's happening and what you can shoot across the field and get a solution. And if you're not involved in it, people think like, oh, that's radical, until it's not anymore. It's not like, oh, that's radical. That's like a no-brainer now, And so I just always appreciate the ways in which people who have these platforms help a lot of us who are grassroots folks who are considered the radicals, quote unquote, at least have enough resources to keep the vision and dreaming alive. Because that's what I think this is about. Mask for the People and all of our other efforts. We sat in a room one day and we said, you know what? Black and brown people aren't going to have PPE. We heard that folks in jails and prisons were going to be written off, like nobody was going to get PPE for them. And it's like, well, let's figure it out on our own. Now, that was a radical idea at the time, 4 months ago, because none of us had did any of this before. But to have folks like, the Warriors and Google and Susie Schuster and all the Black church folks, Erica Ford in New York, everybody just binding together, it shows that ordinary people can make some profound differences and changes.
Yeah, that's the trick, really, is getting getting this normalized. Getting this idea where corporations, sports teams, people with a platform can connect with grassroots organizations, can connect with causes that are so important and important to people's well-being, and then cut through this whole political vortex that you talk about, Justin, which is so difficult today with given the divide that exists in our country and the social aspect of it. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Yeah, and it's another thing that Kendi talks about is just like when does the sort of anti-racist principle become the common sense? So it's like the fringe idea is actually the racist ideas, and the common sense that everybody's like, of course, is the anti-racist ideas. And the last 4 years haven't given us a lot of hope, but the last couple of months we've seen some significant. I mean, to your point, Pastor Mike, like there were things that we supported 4 years ago that people were like, well, let's not really talk about that. That's pretty edgy. Now all of a sudden it's like, we got employees being like, that's not edgy enough. And it's like, Center for Policing Equity, like we need to be, I'm like, man, 4 years ago when we put $5 million in Center for Policing Equity, that was like a radical statement.
Well, me and Steve come out. We should bring you and probably we're here. Chanel is caught in the field. She organizes the Louisville work on the ground around Breonna Taylor, and so she's actually out in the field and can't get on. So we're going to bring her on next week. But I was just going to mention her because, Steve and we were talking about building anti-racism curriculum, right? Like how do we build curriculum that can be taught in the schools to younger people at an earlier age, so we don't have to shift people's sensibilities when they're already adults and it's been formed and concretized. And so I think and I hope that'll be some of the work that we all get to do together with some of our coaches in the NBA. Steve's been organizing. I'm going to give Steve the organizer of the year. He's been organizing the NBA coaches and stuff and doing a lot of cool stuff. But, real quick, we could just, talk some shop real quick because Justin's a huge sports fan, Steve. So we used to go to the Warrior games and cheer. Our hearts were broken watching that. I think we watched the last game. Did we watch it together or one of the last series together?
Well, that's the thing, man. With no Warriors games on, we haven't found a reason to get over this COVID thing and kick it because there's no Warriors on TV.
Justin, you're a Seahawks fan, you said, right?
Yeah, so my dad played basketball at Washington State in the Pac-10. So he's an old Pac-10 college hooper. So I grew up indoctrinated in the sport.
I love it. I love it. What years would he have played at Washington State?
He played against Bill Walton, so that would have been like mid-70s.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's a Sports Illustrated out there somewhere with Walton taking a rebound over my dad at Washington State. We've never been able to surface that picture, but if you have an inside track, Steve, that would be great collateral against my dad if we could go find that Bill Walton posterizing my dad.
Well, it's great to have you hanging out with us, Justin. And again, it's really a fascinating thing around kind of the employee donation programs. And so to all of you who work for corporations or big business, I was on a call with some corporate folks, and I encourage them, employee donation programs, and then just partnering with a local nonprofit that is vetted and that you like could go a long way. Like, don't just give it to all of the big national groups like mine or Color and Change or the NAACP. Like, find you a local group in your community and do an employee donation program. $100,000 given to Black Organizing Project in Oakland, Steve, that we were able to partner with, or like that $100,000 would spend like $1 million. I'm sure they'd be happy to get $1 million too, by the way. So I'm not trying to tell you too shortly, but I think it's really important that we bring folks on because we want to help catalyze people's imagination. There's so many ways to support people who are doing frontline work in the pandemic. And certainly we want to keep amplifying the need to make sure that we all take care of each other in the season. So thanks for your leadership, Jay. You're the man, you know that.
Yeah, man. No, it's a pleasure to be here with y'all. And yeah, man, always good rocking with you. All
right. Well, that seems to be a wrap for today. And, Coach, we had some great conversation, great discussion, and appreciate you. You've been our ace in the hole for the month of July. And I just want to appreciate you, man.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate you having me on. And I'm just glad that I finally could get on technologically, by 4:00 today, barely by the skin of my teeth. No sound coming out of my iPad for 5 minutes in a panic. I mean, man, I'm a mess. I need major technology training.
you no complaints on our end. We worked out, and it's good stuff. So we're gonna see y'all next week. We're gonna definitely have Chanel Helm on and see what else we got up the queue. We're gonna repackage this and put it out this week. So everybody who's watching, please feel free to reshare. I think a lot of good nuggets that Jamel Hill and Justin Steele shared, and more than anything, everyone take good care of yourselves and one another. We got a long way to go. Less than 100 days before the election of 2020, November 3rd. So everybody, please make sure you register to vote. Make sure you request an absentee ballot. As Jamel said, do something small where you are. Bring somebody to the polls. Help them get their registration. Make sure they don't get caught up in the vortex of voter suppression. Any final words or thoughts for us today, Steve?
Well, along those lines, what we're working on right now in the NBA is every team is trying to get their arena to be a local polling. So Atlanta has already secured.
Wow.
I believe Utah has done so in Salt Lake City. We're working on it in San Francisco. It's a really big effort. Obviously, it would be really cool because it would bring in a lot of people. But I think the symbolism would be really important too. Just the idea that all these teams and all these cities are behind, voting rights and let's make voting as easy as possible. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about. This country is supposed to be about democracy. Everybody should have easy access to voting. So we're working at it.
Wow. Well, keep us updated, and whenever it's appropriate, we should do a conversation. I'm sure it's going to be done in a lot of different places, but we can, have more than a 5-minute hit on a cable show and maybe help folks think through some logistics around it. Because I do think that kind of access or that kind of venue would be an amazing gift. Can you imagine if people knew that they could go down to their arena and probably wait 15, 20 minutes to vote versus 4 or 5 hours? I think a lot of people would take for those options, and then it would shrink the kind of wait locally, right? I mean, that in their precinct, that's an amazing thing.
Maybe we'll get Steph Curry to just stand there too, so everybody,
Right.
Hey, Steph, we need more people to vote. So can you come in and just stand so they can look at you?
Right. Or have a picture booth. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he'd have no problem doing that, right?
Well, I'll let you broker that with soon to be Hall of Famer, right? Well, yeah, man. We'll circle back, everybody. Thank y'all for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week. Mask for the people. Go to liveforoUSA.org. Stay strong, stay safe, wear a mask, shelter in place. Let's do all the responsible things so we can keep this pandemic to a minimum loss of infections in life. And we'll see you next week. Stay strong. Peace.